Hi, I'm Ehsan Plus, the avatar for Ehsan Ehsani, an adjunct assistant professor at Columbia Business School and an investor at Crescendo Partners. In this episode of our series on generative AI and value investing, I'm delighted to share a recent conversation Ehsan did with Vladislav Stanev, co-founder of Quantly, a London-based leading provider of Gen AI solutions to investment analysts. I particularly enjoyed the parts of the discussion where Vlad talked about different best practices for structuring and using prompts in an AI system. Without further ado, let's dive in.
All right, we have Vladislav Stanev with us today, co-founder of Quantly, one of the leading solution providers when it comes to generative AI in investment management. He has prepared a great presentation for us. He is also going to do a walkthrough of Quantly solution. After that, I'm excited to hear his thoughts and see the new look and feel of the Quantly solution. So without further ado, Vlad, thanks for coming, and the floor is yours.
Thanks for having me, Aksan, and thanks for the invitation. And thank you to everyone who's watching. I'll just share my screen quickly, and I think you might need to let me do that. There we go. So essentially, Iksan, as Iksan mentioned, founder of Quantly here, and what we do at Quantly, just very briefly, is we're building LLM infrastructure for finance and for investment research. What that really means is that we integrate with funds and financial institutions' internal data. We bring in our own external third-party data providers, and we essentially build an AI analyst assistant to help analysts really uncover insights and make use of all of their knowledge that they have at their disposal. And in order to do that, there's a big part there's a big educational part involved as well because Gen AI is relatively new in industry, across all industries actually, and also especially in finance. And there are certain sort of tricks and certain ways that one can use prompting and use Gen AI in order to enhance their productivity, enhance their work, especially as an analyst. And this is why we've prepared a bunch of slides here to just help introduce how an analyst or how one can use generative AI within the investment research space. So let's get it off without further ado. In general, I mean, I'll skip this slide because over the past few years, I think now everyone is utilizing large language models in one way or another across their lives, both professionally and personally. But especially within finance and investment research, what we're seeing in terms of the landscape is that there has been strong adoption so far. That pace of adoption is also growing, and we expect that to increase over the next few years. And it makes sense because LLMs and Gen AI can bring huge productivity, not just within finance, but also across other industries as well, when it comes to tasks such as information retrieval, idea generation, report generation, workflow automation, etc. Alongside that, of course, the competitive landscape has been evolving quite fast as well. There are a lot of efforts, both internally and externally, to build solutions for analysts and portfolio managers, both on the buy side and on the sell side as well. And competition is intense. So just like Quantly, there's a lot of other tools available out there. And you also have the likes of ChatGPT and Anthropic that one can also make use of. However, what we're seeing is the space is growing fast, but there seems to be a lack of expertise around. There's a lot of interest, especially within banks, to build some of these products, some of these tools internally. But often this requires a lot of resource and also a lot of experimentations, a lot of trial and error, similar to really any new technology. And as a result of that, actually, a lot of those banks and those stakeholders have started to look for to work with external partners, such as Quantly, but also others around as well. And moving on to the impact of Gen AI on investment practices, the three main things that we see and the main benefits that we see, at least initially, are first, manual workflow automation. the ability for analysts to take a workflow that they normally go through, codify it or break it down into steps, into give it to an LLM essentially, and automate that, or at least augment that to an extent. Access to deep knowledge, which essentially gives analysts the capability or the ability to go in and to tap into all of the data that they have at their disposal, whether it's internal, whether it's external, but really centralize that information into one single source of truth. And finally, what that brings is the ability for analysts and PMs to actually focus on high value add work instead of manually searching for bits and pieces across earnings calls, across annual reports, etc. Now they can actually focus more on idea generation, on thesis creation, and on the sell side also more time with clients, faster speed of research, etc. And this is, as some of you might know, myself previously an analyst as well. A very big chunk of the time is spent in these manual workflows that, at least to an extent, can be automated and augmented. You spend majority of your time looking through different information sources, looking for sort of needle in a haystack, essentially, manually gathering that information, writing research, writing reports from scratch. And all of that takes a lot of time, but these are actually processes that there's no need for us to do manually, at least to its full extent. And what we see Gen AI and LLMs do to the analyst job and to the role and the responsibilities is that, as I mentioned previously, it lets analysts focus on more deep research and idea generation. Analysts can now focus on asking the right questions rather than wondering where to get the data that they need in order to answer their questions, or how do they clean it potentially. Faster research time to market, which is extremely important, especially in public markets. And also expanded research coverage. The less time you spend on sort of these manual table stakes tasks, the more you can actually expand the universe of companies you're looking at. And also, again, for the sell side specifically, higher client engagement. And in an industry where the research product and it's extremely competitive, this is one of the most important things right now. However, there are challenges to adopting generative AI to its full extent. Of course, it's still early on, and the industry is evolving very rapidly. But especially within enterprise, within funds, within other financial institutions, there are very big data privacy concerns, and as a result, also regulatory compliance issues there. Where does the data live? Who has access to that data? Whether models are trained on a specific type of sensitive data, leakages, etc. Those are top of mind, especially for the tech and compliance side of things. But not just that, actually, from just the use case and the user side of things, the analyst side of things, reliability and accuracy is probably the most important aspect of using generative AI to help with research. And there, as we know, there are hallucinations within some of the more general models and the general products that use those models, which they're very difficult essentially to tackle. And that erodes the trust in AI. As a result, analysts still need they need more time to adopt en masse generative AI in one of their most important workflows, or processes, which is the research itself. And there is still a long way to go for those users, and in general for people to gain full trust in these systems. And lastly, also there's a steep learning curve in terms of prompt generation for analysts, portfolio managers to really make the most out of this technology. And as we know, with AI, rubbish in means rubbish out, which is true for it's true for LLMs, but it's true also for pretty much any other data and AI related task. But at the end of the day, if your prompt is poor and you have high expectations of what you want the system to output, you will be disappointed because you still need to make sure that your prompt is optimized, and you need to give guidance as much as possible to the model. And also there's a misconception with the generative AI at the moment that it can sort of do your entire job and it can do anything out there. But the truth is that Gen AI and large language models are not a solution to everything. They can definitely help you be more productive. They can augment your work and you can be better at your job with them, but they cannot make investment decisions in this case. They cannot make necessarily non-consensus recommendations on in specific situations, on stocks, etc. That's still, for now, that's still on the responsibility of the analyst. And with this presentation, also with these slides, we want to tackle a little bit the learning curve issue that I mentioned previously. So we have a bunch of fundamentals, a bunch of techniques for effective prompting, specifically for for analysts, and hopefully some of those examples can resonate and can be useful for you in the future as well. So just starting off very basic here, what is the definition of a prompt in the context of Gen AI? Well, a prompt is just the input or the initial query, the question that you give to the system, to the large language model, that serves as a starting point for the system to then start generating content based on that. And there's different ways, as we mentioned previously, to prompt an LLM system, and there's also different types of prompting structures around that as well. It can range from just a single line, single question, as we tend to do quite often, to actually complex multi-prompt instructions for when we're focusing on more complex analysis that requires multiple steps or maybe even potentially reasoning. There's still, models cannot really reason, but we can make them sort of follow some logical steps in order to help us achieve what we want. And then in investment research specifically, again, being precise, giving as much description as possible, giving context, making sure that you know very well how to prompt and the different types of prompting structures that can make a world of difference between you making the most out of this technology as an analyst. So just quickly again, of course, the relationship between the prompt and the output quality is crucial. And this is something that we always have to keep top of mind. Some principles before we start for effective prompting. We have here the following. So it's extremely important to be specific and be concise, to be clear of sort of what you're after when you're asking the prompt, and to be clear of what you want the outcome to look like. Use context setting statements. What that means is make sure that you prepare essentially the system to act how you want it to act. For example, you can tell Quantly, you can tell ChatGPT, okay, now you are an equity analyst or you're a credit analyst. So get the system ready introduce the setup essentially of and the context of what you're after. Breaking complex queries into smaller bits, smaller parts, that's essential as well, because one way of thinking about it is if, let's say, you're an analyst and then you have a junior intern, you wouldn't necessarily go and just tell the junior intern straight away, okay, give me let's say built a DCF, for example, straight away, like junior intern, imagine that. You would actually go and teach the intern how to do that. So you would go step by step across the different tasks that they need to do in order to complete that project. So break those complex analysis into simpler queries. And then lastly, also utilize appropriate keywords, which relates also to using context setting statements and just making sure that you get the LLM in that zone, in that specific scenario where you're working in, so that it can be as effective as possible in helping you and being as useful as possible. So here's an example of a bad prompt that we see actually very often within our system as well, from analysts, from users that use Quantly. Sometimes you just see a query such as sales of Boeing. Well, that's actually a pretty poor prompt, and chances are that you're gonna get an answer from the system, but it very likely might not be what you're after. It might be just something that you didn't expect as an output, because it's just so general. And instead of that, an example of a good prompt that you can sort of reformulate is the following. You're an equity analyst covering Boeing. So you're setting the scene there. Your task is to output a table of Boeing sales over the past 4 quarters and the year-on-year percentage growth rate. That's sort of again giving a leading question to the system, showing what exactly you're after, and actually using a time frame to show, okay, this is a time frame that we're looking at, that we're focusing on, and the specific metric as well, the year-on-year percentage growth rate. Go through the last 4 quarterly reports to find that information. So being as clear as possible, leaving as little as possible to the system for interpretation, that generally tends to help with the output and tends to make the output more useful to your task as well. So one framework that we can use is the role task format framework. It's split into those three pieces, and it tends to work pretty much for every prompt. Sort of when you start prompting, especially in finance use cases, I tend to use that pretty much all the time. And again, we have an example. As a financial analyst, evaluate company X's latest earnings report. Present your findings in a bullet point summary. Well, there you go. You have the role, financial analyst. You have the task, evaluate the latest earnings report. And lastly, the format, present your findings in a bullet point summary. Now, of course, this can be more specific instead of just evaluate the latest earning report. Well, but what does evaluate mean? So what could have been improved here as well is to, if you're after, let's say, top line growth, or if you're after margins or so, well, you can just actually give that to Quantly or to the system that you're using, and it'll hopefully deliver that. We touched upon leading questions technique just now, but essentially the idea is to make sure that you guide the AI towards what you're after, towards your area of interest. And in this case, we have a bit of an interactive example. So in this question, what are the 3 most significant factors affecting company-wise profit margins based on their last 4 quarterly reports? And you can break down that prompt in a few different categories. So you have specific quantity constraint, the 3 most significant factors, the focus of the analysis, it's the factors that impact the company's profit margins. Again, we have the target metric here, profit margins. And lastly, we also have the time period constraint, which is super important, the last 4 quarterly reports. Moving on to iterative prompting. And this is again this is a key prompting structure, essentially a key method of doing research and diving down a rabbit hole. Because at the end of the day, what an analyst's job is to just keep asking questions and to keep sort of follow interesting threads and diving deeper down those threads. So iterative prompting is perfect for that. Essentially, what this means is you use a series of prompts to just progressively deepen that analysis and refine it to essentially go down a particular rabbit hole that's of interest. As an example here, summarize company A's competitive position. Okay, we have the answer for that. And then follow-up question to that could be, what potential threats to this position are evident from the recent industry trends? So you're building on the previous question. And again, if you can continue down that rabbit hole, but it's sort of just starting off basic, starting off from what you would normally sort of start working with, and then diving down or going down layer by layer, step by step, rather than trying to do it all at once in an individual prompt. Prompt training, very similar to iterative prompting, and it's sort of the same, but the idea behind that is that you know the output that you're after, or well, it's the type of output that you're after, the format, or what you're looking for, and essentially you need to get there. But in order to get there, again, you shouldn't just dump all your thoughts in a single prompt, but you should again think about structuring that process. How do you get to that final output, and then breaking down that process into different prompts and chaining them together, essentially. And this is again very similar. Summarize key metrics for the company. Based on these metrics, identify potential areas of concern, and then analyze how these areas of concerns that we've previously identified, how do they impact the company's 5-year growth projections? And then you'll get a much more refined, much better response out of the system in general. Overall, some common pitfalls of prompting. in general that we see all the time across both our users, but I think just in general are the following. So as we keep on repeating, being overly broad and being too vague on the prompting, that's a big one. Assuming too much AI knowledge and just having your sort of that need to adjust your expectations of what you're going to get from the system. Often the AI system, the LLM doesn't know everything. It does look like that it can look like that it does, but assuming that it can do everything and it doesn't have that nuance that yourself or an analyst will have. For example, an analyst covering a company that's what they do, covering it for a few years, they will have much more nuance and knowledge. So then, as a result, they will be able to use the Quantly or any other tool as an assistant to uncover some data, for example, to answer some questions, to maybe generate an idea and get more creative. But you should not use that in isolation. And that's again ignoring the AI's limitations. So looking for example, another very simple example, ChatGPT has a cutoff. So looking for real-time data analysis from that. Well, there are limitations still that we need to be very much aware of around hallucinations, around reasoning, around complex data analysis as well. Not everything works. Failing to provide the necessary context, again, being overly broad, it's quite similar. Being over reliant on the AI generated information, not doing your work as well as using the AI. The AI cannot replace your critical thinking as an analyst, as we mentioned previously. And lastly, again, expecting it to make decisions for you. We have had users on the platform asking, will the stock price of company X go up or down based on a number of factors? That is actually the analyst's job still to uncover. It is not the LLM's job to make the right call in this case. And then just finishing off here with a few more advanced prompting strategies and that are more focused towards qualitative work. So hypothesis-driven prompts, that's actually a favorite of mine and that's quite interesting. Essentially, the idea behind this is to take a hypothesis that you have and then ask, based on the context that you've set up, based on the information that we have, ask the LLM to give evidence supporting or refuting that hypothesis. An example again here, analyze companies X's last 3 years of financial reports to find evidence supporting or refuting the hypothesis that shift to subscription-based services is improving profit margins. So what you're giving here, what you're giving the system here is that the hypothesis, your belief of what is going on, and then the LLM can vary, or the system can very easily go into a corpus of, let's say, earnings calls and annual reports, etc., financial documents, and extract that evidence that is related to your hypothesis. It can be in the form of quotes, it can be in the form of data, but it will definitely do a much better job and a much faster job. Not necessarily a better job over time, but definitely a much faster job than the analyst in order to get that evidence and to at least, again, give the analyst the ability to either very quickly refute that hypothesis or very quickly say, okay, there's something interesting here. I'm down the right track. Let's dive deeper. What LLMs are great at, and this is a huge benefit, is they let the analyst be more creative when testing hypothesis.
I particularly like this last slide because this form of prompting can be very, very handy when an analyst is trying to go through thesis formation or if they want to see if their investment thesis is still tracking. So very, very interesting and helpful.
Exactly. There's a lot of use cases around thesis drift specifically that LLMs can just make much more efficient, and really the efficiency case and just being able to very quickly go through sort of invalidate hypotheses or identify different theses, etc. That is a huge benefit in terms of just the ability to go through and to produce more research, especially if a metric that internally a fund is tracking, which is the hit rate, which is how many companies is an analyst researching versus how many companies, which of those turn into some sort of position. Technically, If an analyst spends time on a company, but that doesn't materialize into a position, well, that's sort of time wasted. And the idea is to be able to invalidate at least a lot of that as quickly as possible. Here, incorporating temporal analysis. So this is just taking a time frame, a few years or whatnot, and comparing the information that a company produces, let's say, over time, seeing the changes that are happening and what is sort of going on there. So, for example, here, compare the risk factor section of an annual report over the past 3 years or whatnot, 21, 22, 23, identify any new risks that have been added that have been removed. And essentially, with those, with this, you can very quickly just see what's going on, because it is often that companies might slide something into the risk factor section or remove something, and it is time consuming to go through each one and attentively sort of go through and find those. You can do that quickly here. And actually, there's an example of a prompt that could have been broken down into two. First, you start with this one, identifying any risks, and then afterwards, once those risks have been identified, then you can actually ask a follow-up. Well, what might these changes suggest about the evolution of the company's business environment? Structuring comparative prompts for cross-entity insights, well, that's pretty much the same, but instead of assessing or comparing, let's say, information over time, you compare information across companies, across competitors. So, for example, you take the latest annual reports of top 3 companies, or you can name those companies and compare certain metrics, certain figures there as well. Detecting anomalies, again, picking inconsistencies over time. LLMs are very good at that, and at least this is what we found. But that's about taking financial statements, for example, earnings calls, etc., financial documents, and seeing or trying to spot any sort of unusual fluctuations, either in metrics or maybe in themes that are being discussed, any new topics, any new themes that pop out over a period of time in the earnings calls. That's quite interesting to see, and sort of how long do these themes linger, etc., is another one as well. And just finishing up here, we've spoken about this throughout the whole presentation. But tasks that are best suited for AI assistance, it's going through large quantities of information, structured or unstructured, synthesizing it, deriving conclusions, or using it as idea generation, recognizing patterns, but just overall doing initial screening it can be done very effectively with Quantly. I tend to talk about Quantly 99% of the time. So, but with any other tool that is fit for purpose. And lastly, also just the report creation, report formatting, all that, or the more standard content generation part that LLMs are very good at. And one last thing that I'd like to leave you with is of how to make the most out of generative AI as an analyst. And it's really sort of using or being very conscious about using Gen AI as an assistant, using it as a helping hand, but by no means using it as a decision-making tool that to end all work, essentially. So you can use it as a starting point when you start exploring a particular company. Let's say you start covering or you start exploring a particular situation or an event. You will get interesting findings from the system, but make sure you put that into context. Make sure you critically evaluate those, and you use your experience, your intuition as well to combine them. Get creative. This is key, and I think few people actually utilize these tools as sort of more creativity enabling tools, but ask the weird questions. Ask the questions that no one is asking, or ones that don't even make sense potentially, because you never know what you're going to find. But the cost of actually going through that process is very low. So, of course, you may not have time to get creative and to validate some of your silly hypotheses manually, but with a system such as with an LLM system, why not? Might as well try. Again, apply critical thinking. Make sure that you look at the information and you look at the output twice before going forward.
Right. I
Again,
think one of the key takeaways for me in previous slide was you shouldn't necessarily always look at Gen AI solution as tools that do things for you. Even in scenarios in which you decide to do majority or bulk of the task yourself, you can always compare and contrast and augment your findings with what Gen AI recommends. And that's
exactly.
definitely might result in occasionally some unexpected outcome, which will be a value add.
Exactly. You never know, or you might see something that you think, oh, that's interesting. Let's actually dive deeper. And there's a lot of value in that process as well. And again, one last thing, AI enhances but does not replace the analyst judgment. This is important to always keep in mind. And with that, we're done pretty much with the prompting structures and the presentation. But I wanted to just quickly show you in practice how some of our customers, how some of our users actually use Gen AI in their day-to-day work. So just going
Wonderful.
into Quantly here. I hope you can see this. You can see the platform on this in this new screen. But the way that Quantly works, just very briefly, is you can start off your new research here. You have the ability to just go back and forth with Quantly as you would with, let's say, an assistant with an analyst. Or actually, you have these so-called playbooks that we have that are need those manual workflows that I mentioned, sort of sequential steps that an analyst would normally go through in their day-to-day, but manually. And so, just quick example. Actually, let me go straight away. I'll just show you the playbooks because those are the most interesting ones.
Yeah,
So,
and I actually really like the idea of this playbook because one of the challenges with use of Gen AI investment research is that analysts or companies, they have their own process. They have a set of repeatable or proven tasks and activities that they go through to arrive at a go, no-go decision. So if you want to utilize Gen AI, uh, these solutions somehow need to be embedded in the processes that they go through over and over. And these playbooks are, I think, a great idea in order to make that happen. So when you first showed them to me, I was really excited with this functionality.
yeah, thanks, Oksana. This is the point. So this is for us the first step of taking these manual workflows, but which are very personal to the analysts and the PMs as well within funds, and giving them the ability to actually augment or automate some of them. But there is still so much more to be done, especially when you connect. This is all of these playbooks right now run on external data, on public company data, but connecting a system like this to your internal data as well, then really that makes such systems extremely powerful because then you can combine that internal information with the public data that everyone has access to, but that leads to the analyst, the PM's edge in this case. Sort of you have that differentiated data and differentiated output as well, and your own specific way of working, way of looking at a company. So this is an example of a playbook, FCF and credit metrics report, and as you can see, it's in multiple steps here that we've defined, but this also leads to a problem for users, and this is something that we discovered. Well, users are struggling to prompt effectively, right? So how do we expect them to create a whole playbook, a whole set of steps in the most effective way? So what we did is we thought, okay, let's actually help them generate a playbook based on what they're after. And this is what we did. So when a user creates a playbook, you can actually generate that whole process with AI. So let's playbook name. Let's say you're a, well, let's say you're a credit investor. So you can say credit, new company, playbook. And then you give a purpose, a description of what you want that playbook to do. So let's go, I am a credit investor. I care mainly about, well, we just looked at FCF, so I'll just use FCF and leverage metrics and credit ratings. I am, or actually let's put it here, or to be honest, actually it doesn't matter. A credit investor starting to look at a new issuer. And then we can generate the playbook. And then what Quantly does is, based on that description, which is actually extremely brief, Quantly will create a draft of that process that one would follow as a credit investor that cares mainly about free cash flow and credit ratings. And here we have it. So we have the steps generated by Quantly: company overview, credit ratings analysis, free cash flow, leverage metrics, etc. So we can create that. And then we can edit it further because we were relatively vague in our description of the playbook. We can edit it, we can change it to specifically what we're after. And then once that's done, then we can just launch the playbook. We can add context. So it can be any company here. Let's use, I don't know. I mean, I always tend to use NVIDIA. I always default to that these days. You can choose NVIDIA or multiple companies in there. You can add files, you can upload sort of URLs, website, you can choose specific documents. In the near future also, you'll be able to, and also with companies that we're working with, you can actually connect that to your internal drives for your internal notes, etc. And let Quantly actually access the web because why not? All the data is referenced. And then Quantly starts step by step. Quantly starts executing that playbook, and once that playbook is completed, then you can convert it into a report. The answers in the playbook, because this one is quite detailed, is going to take a few minutes. So in that case, actually, I'll just quickly go into another playbook to show you the output of that because it's quite interesting. This is someone that I showed the playbook to, Julian's playbook. So he was interested in some information around sort of the headcount, net margin, gross margins of a number of companies. And in this case, we used Capgemini, and this is essentially the output of that playbook. So for the companies, we have headcount, net margin, etc. All of that information is referenced from the place where it's taken from. Just to make sure that we build that trust in the system, and we make sure that the analyst is confident in the accuracy and reliability of the platform as well. Here again, additional information around initiatives around AI in this case, notable client implementation, etc. But to be honest, it can be anything. It can be any sort of process, any sort of thesis that you're looking to develop. You can turn it into a playbook, and then you can test it on companies. And then here we have the follow-up questions, which again, they serve as an idea generation, as a way to inspire sort of questions that maybe you as an analyst haven't thought of. So this is what I wanted to show. And if anyone's interested to chat further or to have a look at Quantly to test it out, please feel free to reach out, and I'd love to set something up and give you access for you to try it out and to play around with Quantly. But yeah, Exan, that's pretty much it.
Well, Vlad, I certainly enjoyed your presentation and the demo. I particularly like the new look and feel and flexibility of the playbooks in your new version of Quantly. I know we can go on for hours discussing these topics, but before we conclude the conversation, maybe you talk a little bit about the quality of underlying data when someone uses Gen AI solutions such as yours, and how we can improve on that front.
Yeah, so overall, the quality of the data is extremely important. And actually, what data a system like this runs on is really the main differentiator for the insights and the knowledge that the system produces. In general, and this is something that we learned sort of the hard way, but we started Quantly off by being just, or we imagine it being sort of a very hands-off SaaS product that analysts would use. And then we have external data on the platform. We're currently powered by S&P Capital IQ. We have a Bloomberg partnership as well. But the reality of that is that everyone has access to that data. Everyone has access to the earnings calls, to the annual reports, etc. And so at the end of the day, as an analyst, it is definitely helpful as a point solution, but it is by no means transformative to the way that one works. Well, not only because of the data, but also because you can only do so much just with that data, even if you automate a process, create a playbook, let's say, for a particular process that focuses only on that data. And a lot of companies have actually been discussing sort of that there's a lot of fuss about Gen AI, but there's a lack of there's a lack of ROI from all that investment. And I think one of the reasons for that is actually because they don't embrace it fully. They use point solutions here and there. They try to augment one small process here and there to save a certain amount of time or so. But again, this is not the most effective way of doing so. Actually, how you can leverage Gen AI in the best way is by fully committing where an institution, or let's say a research business of a bank or a fund, take all their data that they use. They make sure that they get it ready for an LLM. They integrate all that data into a single source of truth, a single knowledge hub essentially, and then they use an LLM on top or a system such as Quantly on top in order to really augment all of the work that they do, because a process is not just isolated on its own. A process is, or the way a successful process works is, it requires multiple sources of information, multiple data points from a wide-ranging well, different parts of the organizations, or potentially different sources of data. So I think that's one of the things that differentiates the output, but also just differentiates how people make use of generative AI in general. And I think that's something that companies are getting around to, but they're not there yet.
Wonderful, very helpful. Well, again, thank you for your time. It was a very nice and insightful conversation, and I hope to keep in touch and catch up again in a few months from now, see the new developments with Quantly.
Thank you so much, Exxon.
All right, have a great day. Bye.